Hi, my name is Atlas Stone, and for 12 years I thought I was protecting a kid from the truth about why his parents abandoned him. I gave him every answer except the real one. I built him a foundation of hope on a lie so beautiful that even I believed it. But last Tuesday, when he looked me in the eyes and asked that question one more time, I finally told him the truth. And what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and the weight of secrets we carry for the people we love most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came at 2:47 in the morning on a Thursday in March. I know the exact time because I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, doing what I always did when sleep wouldn't come, counting the water stains that looked like clouds across the plaster. The phone buzzed against the nightstand, vibrating with that particular urgency that only comes from unknown numbers in the dead of night. I almost didn't answer, almost rolled over and let it go to voicemail like any reasonable person would at that hour. But something about the timing felt different, heavy, like the universe was holding its breath. "Mr. Stone," the voice was thin, professional, tired. "This is Margaret Chen from Child Protective Services. We have a situation here and your name came up as a potential emergency placement. Are you available to take a child tonight?" I sat up, feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. My brain was still catching up, but my body already knew. This was it. After 3 years of paperwork, background checks, and home visits, after all those classes about trauma and attachment and the careful dance of loving someone else's child, the moment had arrived, wrapped in darkness and urgency. "How old?" I asked. "7. His name is Marcus. He was removed from his home about 4 hours ago. The details aren't pretty, Mr. Stone. He hasn't said a word since we picked him up." I was already moving, pulling on jeans, searching for a clean shirt. "What do I need to know?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Margaret's voice came back, softer now, more human. "He was found alone in an apartment that had been abandoned for at least a week. No food, no heat, utilities cut off. Neighbors finally called when they heard him crying. We think he's been taking care of himself this whole time." My chest tightened. 7 years old. The same age I was when my own world first cracked open. I should be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the CPS office felt longer than it should have, every red light stretching into eternity. I kept thinking about what I'd say to him, how I'd explain that he was safe now without making promises I couldn't keep. The training had covered this, but theory and reality never quite align when you're about to meet a child whose entire world just imploded. The building was mostly dark except for the fluorescent lights in the emergency intake wing. I'd been there before during the approval process, but at night it felt different, colder, more institutional, the kind of place where childhoods go to get processed and filed and hopefully reassembled into something that resembles normal. Margaret met me at the security door. She was younger than I'd expected from her voice, maybe early 30s, with the kind of exhausted eyes that come from seeing too much too often. Behind her, through a glass partition, I could see him. Marcus was small for 7, curled up in a chair that swallowed him whole. Dark hair fell across his forehead and he wore a Superman t-shirt that had seen better days. His feet dangled off the chair, not quite reaching the floor, and in his lap he clutched a stuffed elephant that looked like it had been through a war. "He hasn't let go of that elephant since we found him," Margaret said quietly. "We think it might be the only thing he has left from before." I watched him through the glass, this tiny person who had learned too young that the adults in his life could simply disappear. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something the rest of us couldn't see. There was something achingly familiar about that look, that particular way of being present in your body while your mind retreated somewhere safer. "What about his parents?" I asked. Margaret's expression darkened. "Mother has a history of substance abuse, multiple arrests, in and out of rehab. She's been missing for 2 weeks now. Father's never been in the picture, not even on the birth certificate. Extended family either can't be located or have made it clear they're not interested in placement. So he's alone." "Not anymore," she said, looking at me with something that might have been hope. "If you're ready for this." I'd been ready for 3 years. At least I thought I had been. But standing there, watching this child who had been forgotten by everyone who was supposed to love him, I realized that nothing could have prepared me for the weight of this moment. This wasn't just about providing a safe place to sleep or making sure he got to school on time. This was about becoming the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire short life. Does anyone care enough to stay? Margaret opened the door to the waiting room and Marcus looked up for the first time. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-green, and when he took in my appearance with the careful attention of someone much older, cataloging details, assessing threat levels, calculating escape routes. It was heartbreaking how practiced he was at this evaluation. Marcus, Margaret said gently, this is Mr. Stone. He's going to take care of you for a while, is that okay? The boy's grip tightened on his elephant, but he nodded once, a tiny economical gesture that somehow conveyed both resignation and the faintest flicker of hope. I knelt down so we were at eye level. Hi Marcus, I know this is scary, and I know you don't know me yet, but I want you to know that you're safe now. My house has a room just for you and tomorrow we can figure out what you need to feel more comfortable there. He studied my face for a long moment, then whispered something so quiet I almost missed it. What was that, buddy? Are you going to send me back? His voice was papery, fragile, like it might crumble if handled too roughly. The question hit me like a physical blow. 7 years old and he already knew that safety was temporary, that adults made promises they didn't keep, that home was something other people had. No, I said firmly. I'm not going to send him. We're going to figure this out together, okay? He nodded again, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the possibility of trust somewhere down the road. The ride to my house was quiet except for the soft sound of Marcus breathing and the occasional snuffle from the back seat. I'd installed a car seat that afternoon, following the YouTube tutorial twice to make sure I got it right. He seemed so small in it, overwhelmed by the straps and padding designed to keep him safe. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching him watch the world go by through the window, committing every street light and stop sign to memory like he might need to find his way back. My house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that straddled the line between working class and suburban aspiration, nothing fancy but solid, safe, the kind of place where kids rode bikes in the street and neighbors actually knew each other's names. I'd bought it specifically with this moment in mind, choosing the extra bedroom over the bigger kitchen, prioritizing the fenced backyard over the upgraded bathroom. As we pulled into the driveway, Marcus pressed his face against the window. Is this where you live? This is where we live, I corrected gently, at least for now. Inside I gave him the tour, kitchen, living room, bathroom and finally his room. I'd spent weeks getting it ready, agonizing over paint colors and furniture placement, wanting it to feel welcoming without being overwhelming. The walls were a soft blue-gray, and there was a twin bed with a navy comforter, a desk by the window and shelves waiting to be filled with whatever made him happy. Marcus stood in the doorway, still clutching his elephant, taking it all in. This is mine, it's yours, I confirmed. You can arrange it however you like. We can get different stuff if you want, or add things that make you feel more at home. He stepped inside cautiously like he was entering a place he wasn't sure he belonged. He walked to the window and peered out at the backyard, where an old oak tree cast shadows across the grass in the moonlight. Can I sleep with my elephant? Of course you can. What's your elephant's name? He looked down at the worn stuffed animal, stroking one of its ears. Peanut. My mom gave him to me when I was little. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother, and I felt the weight of that trust, fragile and precious. Peanut's a great name. I bet he's been a good friend to you. Marcus nodded solemnly. He keeps the scary dreams away sometimes. I helped him get ready for bed, showing him where the towels were, how the shower worked, where I kept the extra toothbrushes. He moved through these routines with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned early to be self-sufficient.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
No complaints, no questions, just quiet acceptance of whatever came next. When he was finally settled under the covers, Peanut tucked securely against his chest, I sat on the edge of the bed. Marcus, I want you to know that if you need anything tonight, anything at all, my room is right across the hall. You don't have to ask permission to get up. You don't have to be scared. This is your house too, now. He looked up at me with those storm cloud eyes. Mr. Stone, yeah buddy, why did my real parents throw me away? The question hung in the air between us like a live wire, dangerous and electric. I'd known it was coming, had rehearsed different versions of this conversation during training, but hearing it from his small, earnest voice made all my prepared answers seem inadequate. The truth was complicated and ugly, and not something a 7-year-old should have to carry. His mother was an addict, who chose drugs over her child, who disappeared for days at a time, who left him alone and hungry while she chased her next high. His father was a ghost, a name that didn't exist, an absence that shaped everything about Marcus's understanding of his own worth. But looking down at this child who had already survived more than most adults ever would, I made a choice that would define the next 12 years of our lives together, though I didn't know it then. They didn't throw you away, I said quietly. Sometimes adults make really bad choices, and sometimes they're sick in ways that make it hard for them to take care of anyone, even themselves. But that doesn't mean there was anything wrong with you. You're not something to be thrown away, Marcus, you're someone to be treasured. But if I was good, they would have stayed, right? The logic was brutal in its simplicity, the kind of reasoning that children use when they're trying to make sense of a senseless world. If I was lovable, I would be loved. If I was valuable, I wouldn't be discarded. If I was enough, they wouldn't have left. Oh buddy, I said, my voice thick, that's not how it works. You are good, you're so good, and so brave, and so strong. The choices they made, those were about them, not about you. Sometimes people are broken in ways that have nothing to do with the people around them. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then do you think they'll come back for me? I chose my words carefully, not wanting to give him false hope but also not wanting to destroy the possibility entirely. I don't know what's going to happen with them, Marcus, but I know what's going to happen with us. I'm going to be here, every day, even on the hard days, even when things get confusing or scary. I'm going to be here. Promise? I promise. He settled back into his pillow, seemingly satisfied with this answer. I started to get up, but his voice stopped me. Mr. Stone, can you leave the door open? Just a little bit? Of course. I left the door cracked open, the hallway light casting a thin golden line across his floor, a bridge between his room and mine. I could hear him talking quietly to Peanut, words too soft to make out, but the rhythm was comforting, the sound of someone who wasn't quite alone anymore. In my own room I lay awake staring at those ceiling stains, listening for any sound from across the hall. Every creak of the house settling, every car passing on the street, every whisper of wind through the trees felt amplified in the darkness. I was responsible for him now, this child who had been abandoned and forgotten, this little boy, who asked impossible questions with devastating innocence. I thought about my own childhood, about the day my world shifted, and nothing was ever the same again. I'd been older than Marcus, old enough to understand more, but still young enough for it to leave scars that never quite healed. Maybe that's why I'd ended up here, in this house, with this child, trying to be the answer someone had needed when I was small. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a moment I panicked, forgetting where I was, who was in my house. Then I remembered and felt a different kind of anxiety. Had he slept? Was he okay? Was he trying to run away? I found him standing at the kitchen counter, still in his Superman pajamas, staring at the coffee maker like it held the secrets of the universe. "Morning, buddy. Sleep okay?" He shrugged, a gesture that was becoming familiar. "I was trying to make coffee for you, like my mom used to do in the mornings, but I couldn't reach the buttons." My chest tightened at this small act of service, this 7-year trying to take care of the adult in his life, because that's what he'd learned love looked like. Taking care of others, even when you were the one who needed caring for. "That's really thoughtful of you, Marcus, but you don't have to make coffee for me. How about we make breakfast together instead? Do you like pancakes?" His face lit up for the first time since I'd met him. "Real pancakes? Like with syrup?" "Real pancakes with real syrup. And maybe some bacon too, if you want." We spent the morning in the kitchen, measuring flour and cracking eggs, him standing on a step stool so he could reach the mixing bowl. He was careful and precise in everything he did, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being too much trouble. When flour spilled on the counter, he immediately started cleaning it up, apologizing like it was a catastrophe. "Mistakes are okay," I told him, stilling his hands. "We can always clean up messes. That's what paper towels are for." He looked at me skeptically, like this was information that contradicted everything he'd previously learned about the world. The pancakes were lopsided and slightly burned, but Marcus ate them like they were the best thing he'd ever tasted. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, swinging his legs, Peanut propped in the chair beside him, and for a moment, it felt like we'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "Mr. Stone?" he said around a mouthful of pancake. "Yeah, buddy? Are you going to be my dad now?" The question was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took me a moment to process what he'd asked. Foster care was supposed to be temporary. a bridge between one placement and another, between crisis and stability. I'd been trained to maintain boundaries, to remember that these children weren't mine to keep, that my job was to provide safety and care while the system worked toward reunification or permanency. But looking at Marcus, syrup on his chin and hope in his eyes, all of that training felt abstract and irrelevant. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, I said honestly, but I know that I want to take care of you, for as long as you need me to. Is that something you'd like? He nodded vigorously. Can I call you Dad? The word hit me like a tsunami of emotion I wasn't prepared for. Dad. Such a simple word, but it carried the weight of responsibility, and love and commitment, and fear all wrapped up in 3 letters. If that's what you want to call me, then yes, I'd be honored. He grinned then, the first real smile I'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. For a moment he looked like what he was, a 7-year-old boy, who had just been given permission to hope again. The first few weeks were an adjustment for both of us. Marcus moved through the house like he was afraid to leave fingerprints, careful not to touch anything unless specifically invited, quick to clean up any trace of his presence. He hoarded food in his room, hiding crackers and fruit in his dresser drawers, preparing for the inevitable day when meals might not come. He startled at loud noises, and watched the door whenever someone knocked, ready to run if the wrong person walked through it. But slowly, carefully, he began to trust. He started leaving toys in the living room, without immediately putting them away. He asked for seconds at dinner, without apologizing. He fell asleep without checking to make sure I was still in the house. School was harder. Marcus was smart, clearly intelligent, but he'd missed significant chunks of his education. He could read basic words but struggled with math, knew some letters but couldn't write his full name. The gaps in his knowledge told the story of his early life as clearly as any case file: periods of attendance interrupted by chaos, learning delayed by survival, curiosity stunted by trauma. I enrolled him at the elementary school down the street, meeting with his teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, to explain his situation, without sharing details that weren't mine to share. She was kind and experienced, the type of educator who understood that some children needed extra patience, extra grace, extra time to believe that adults could be trusted. Marcus clung to me that first morning, suddenly reluctant to let me out of his sight. "What if you don't come back?" he whispered, as we stood outside his classroom. "I will always come back," I promised him. "Every day. Right here at 3:15. But if you get scared or need me before then, you can ask Mrs. Rodriguez to call me, okay?" He nodded but didn't let go of my hand. I knelt down to his level, aware that other parents and children were watching, not caring. "You know what?" I said, pulling out my wallet. "See this picture?" It was a photo from our second week together, the 2 of us building a blanket fort in the living room. He was laughing at something I'd said, his face completely open and happy. "I kept this with me so I can remember how much fun we have together when I'm at work. Maybe you'd like to keep something that reminds you of home too." I gave him a small picture I'd printed that morning, the 2 of us making those first pancakes, flour on our faces, matching grins. He studied it carefully, then tucked it into his backpack like it was made of gold. When I picked him up that afternoon, he ran to me with the excitement I'd never seen from him before. Dad, look what I drew." He thrust a paper at me, a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, one tall, one small, both smiling. "Who's this?" I asked, though I already knew. "That's you and me," he said proudly. "Mrs. Rodriguez said I could take it home." "I love it," I told him, and I meant it. "This is definitely going on the refrigerator." That night, as I was tucking him into bed, Marcus asked the question again, the one that had become our ritual, our nightly exploration of the mystery that defined his young life. "Dad, why did my real parents throw me away?" I'd been refining my answer over the weeks, trying to find words that were honest but not devastating, that acknowledged his pain without adding to it. You know how sometimes when you're playing, you might break a toy not because you don't like the toy, but because you forgot to be careful. Sometimes adults are broken in ways that make it hard for them to be careful with precious things. You were the most precious thing they had, but they forgot how to be careful. But why couldn't they learn? Like when I learned to tie my shoes. Learning to be a good parent is harder than learning to tie shoes. Buddy, some people need help to learn, and some people aren't ready to ask for help yet. Do you think they miss me? I think anyone who knew you would miss you if you were gone. You're pretty unforgettable. He seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling deeper into his blankets with Peanut clutched close, but as I reached for the light switch, he spoke again. "Dad, I'm glad they couldn't figure it out." "Why's that?" "Because if they had figured it out, I wouldn't have found you, and you're the best dad ever." My throat closed up completely. It took me several tries to find my voice. "You're the best son ever too, Marcus." After I turned off the light and closed his door to just a crack, I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to him whisper goodnight to Peanut, feeling the weight of what we'd built together in such a short time. This child who had been discarded and forgotten, had somehow found his way to me, and in saving him, he'd saved something in me too. The months turned into a year, and Marcus bloomed like a plant finally getting enough sunlight. He made friends at school, joined the soccer team, learned to ride a bike in our driveway. His laugh came easier now, loud and uninhibited, filling the house with a joy I'd never known I was missing. He still had hard days, still woke up sometimes from nightmares, still asked about his birth parents with the persistence of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. But he also had good days, great days, days when he forgot to be careful, when he left messes without apologizing, when he took up space like he belonged in it. Days when he called me Dad without hesitation, when he planned our weekend adventures, when he talked about the future like it was something he was allowed to have. The adoption process began almost without my What started as temporary placement became long-term care, became guardianship, became the slow, careful construction of something permanent. Margaret, his caseworker, had become a friend over the months, stopping by not just for official visits, but for coffee and updates on Marcus's progress. His birth mother had been located briefly, picked up on drug charges in another state, but she'd refused to engage with reunification services. She signed papers terminating her parental rights with the same casual indifference she'd shown when she'd walked out of his life the first time. His father remained a mystery, a gap in the paperwork that couldn't be filled. Marcus was 8 when the adoption became official. We celebrated with his favorite dinner, pizza and ice cream cake, and he wore a new shirt that said Stone Family that he'd picked out himself. He'd grown 3 inches in the year we'd been together, his face losing some of its sharp wariness, rounding out with better nutrition and steady sleep. That night, he asked the question again, but this time it sounded different. "Dad, why did my real parents throw me away?" I looked at him, this boy who was mine now in every way that mattered, who carried my name and my love and my promise to always be there. "I think," I said carefully, "that sometimes the universe has to move people around to get them where they belong. Maybe your birth parents couldn't take care of you not because you weren't worth taking care of, but because you were supposed to end up here, with me. Maybe everything that happened, all the sad and scary parts, were just the universe's way of bringing you home." "Do you really think that?" "I think that I can't imagine my life without you in it. I think that every choice that led you to my door, even the bad ones, were worth it because they brought us together." He smiled then, that brilliant transformative smile that still caught me off guard with its power. "Me too, Dad. I think the universe is pretty smart." As he settled into sleep that night, I realized that the story I'd been telling him, the one about the universe moving people to where they belonged, had become true somewhere along the way, not because it explained his abandonment, or justified his pain, but because it gave meaning to what came after, made him the hero of his own story, instead of the victim, made his survival a victory instead of just an accident. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known as I watched him sleep peacefully in the room that was permanently his now, was that the story I'd built for him was about to crack open. The careful narrative I'd constructed, the beautiful lie I'd wrapped around the ugly truth, was going to meet reality in the form of a letter that would arrive on a Tuesday morning when Marcus was 19 years old. And when that letter came, when the truth finally demanded to be told, everything we'd built together would have to be strong enough to survive it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, slipped between the electric bill and a grocery store circular, like it was nothing more than junk mail. I almost threw it away without looking, distracted by the coffee I was making, and the sound of Mark upstairs getting ready for his classes at the community college. He was 19 now, tall and lean with my stubborn jaw, but his mother's storm cloud eyes, though he'd never known that detail about his inheritance. I was reaching for the recycling bin when something made me pause. The return address was barely legible, written in shaky hand that looked like it belonged to someone much older than their years. No name, just an address in Phoenix, Arizona. but it was addressed to Marcus Stone, in careful block letters that suggested the writer had taken their time, had something important to say. My hands were steadier than they should have been as I turned the envelope over. No seal, just tucked flaps that opened easily. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, the kind with holes punched for a 3-ring binder, and the same shaky handwriting filled both sides. Marcus, it began, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if the address I found online is even right anymore. I don't know if you remember me, or if you even want to, but I had to try because I'm running out of time, and there are things you need to know before I'm gone. My stomach dropped. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the paper trembling in my grip. My name is Linda Morrison. I was Linda Hayes when you were little. I'm your mother. I know I don't have any right to call myself that after what I did, but I carried you for 9 months, and I loved you every day of your life, even when I was too sick to show it. Especially then. The words blurred as I read them. 12 years. 12 years. 12 years. 12 years of Marcus asking why his parents had thrown him away, and now she was reaching out like she had every right to waltz back into his life, with explanations and apologies. I'm in hospice now, liver failure. The doctors say I have maybe a month left, probably less. I've been clean for 3 years, Marcus. 3 years, 2 months and 16 days. I know that doesn't make up for anything. I know it's too little too late, but I wanted you to know that I tried. I finally tried. I should have stopped reading there. Should have thrown the letter away, and never mentioned it to Marcus. Protected him from this final abandonment, disguised as reconciliation. But I couldn't stop. The words pulled me forward like a current I couldn't fight. I need you to know that leaving you wasn't a choice I made because I didn't love you. I left because I loved you too much to keep destroying your life with my sickness. Every time I looked at you, I saw what I was doing to you. How scared you were, how you tried to take care of me, when you were barely old enough to take care of yourself. You were 7 years old, and you knew how to make peanut butter sandwiches and check if I was breathing when I passed out on the couch. No child should have to live like that. My hands were shaking now. Marcus had never told me about making sandwiches or checking if his mother was breathing. In all our conversations about his early life, he'd focused on the abandonment, the hunger, the loneliness. He'd never mentioned being his mother's care, never described the weight of keeping someone alive when you're too young to understand why they keep trying to die. The night I left, I stood outside your bedroom door for an hour, watching you sleep. You looked so peaceful, holding that little elephant I'd given you. I almost changed my mind 100 times, but then I remembered finding you crying in the bathroom, because there was no food in the house, and I'd spent the grocery money on pills. I remembered you asking me why I was always sick, why the medicine made me sleep so much, why the scary men kept coming to the door looking for money. I kissed your forehead while you slept, and I promised you that I would get clean and come back for you. I promised myself that I would become the mother you deserved. But by the time I was ready, by the time I was strong enough, you were gone. The system had moved you somewhere safe, somewhere I couldn't find you, and maybe that was for the best. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading. My coffee had gone cold, and somewhere above me, I could hear Marcus moving around, getting ready to leave for his morning classes. He was studying early childhood development, planning to work with kids who'd been through trauma like he had. He wanted to be the kind of adult who helped children believe in themselves again, who showed them that their past didn't have to define their future. How could I give him this letter? How could I let his dying mother reach out from across the country and tear apart everything we'd built together? How could I let her rewrite the story we'd created, the one where he was precious and wanted and worthy of love? But how could I not? I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, then sat there staring at it like it might spontaneously combust. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen from next door walking her ancient golden retriever, the same route they took every morning at exactly 8:30. Everything looked normal, ordinary, unchanged, but inside this kitchen, inside this envelope, everything had shifted. Marcus came downstairs 20 minutes later, backpack slung over one shoulder, keys jingling in his hand. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to question his place in the world, at least not since he was 7. College had been good for him. He'd made friends, joined study groups, even started dating a girl named Sarah who made him laugh until his sides hurt. "Morning, Dad," he said, grabbing an apple from the bowl on the counter. "Professor Martinez moved our exam to Friday, so I'll be home earlier today. Want to grab dinner somewhere?" I watched him take a bite of the apple, watched him check his phone for messages, watched him live his life with the casual assumption that today would be like yesterday, that the foundation we'd built together was solid enough to stand on forever. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "That sounds good." He paused at the door, looking back at me with those storm cloud eyes that were so much like hers. "You okay? You seem weird." "Just tired. Long night at work yesterday." He accepted this explanation because he trusted me completely, because in 12 years I'd never given him a reason not to. "All right, well, try to get some rest today. I'll see you tonight." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone with the letter and the impossible choice it represented. I could throw it away, pretend it never came, let Marcus continue believing the story we'd created together, or I could give it to him and watch everything change. I spent the morning reading the letter over and over, memorizing every word, every excuse, every attempt at explanation. Linda Morrison, who used to be Linda Hayes, his mother who'd been clean for 3 years, but waited until she was dying to reach out, who claimed she'd left him because she loved him, but had spent 12 years, making no effort to contact him, to check if he was safe, to be part of his life in any way that mattered. By lunchtime, I'd made my decision. I was going to destroy the letter. Marcus was happy, successful, surrounded by people who loved him. He had a future planned out, goals that mattered to him, relationships that brought him joy. Why would I jeopardize all of that for the sake of someone who'd already caused him enough pain? But then I remembered something he'd said to me just a few weeks earlier. We'd been watching a movie, some drama about family secrets, and during a particularly intense scene he'd turned to me and said, "I'm glad we don't have secrets like that, Dad. I'm glad you've always been honest with me about everything." The words had made me proud at the time. I'd raised him to value honesty, to trust that the people who loved him would tell him the truth, even when it was difficult. How could I betray that now? How could I decide what he did or didn't need to know about his own life? I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, and spent the afternoon walking through the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. Past the elementary school where Mrs. Rodriguez had helped him learn to trust adults again. Past the park where we'd played catch, until his arm was strong enough for Little League. Past the corner store, where old Mr. Kim had always slipped him an extra piece of candy and asked about his grades. This was his world, the one we'd built together. These were his memories, his landmarks, his foundation, but they were all built on a story that wasn't entirely true, a narrative I'd crafted to protect him from the complexity of his mother's love and abandonment. I found myself standing outside the house where we'd lived when he was small, the one I'd sold when he left for college. The new owners had painted it yellow instead of blue and added a swing set in the backyard, but it was still recognizably the place where Marcus had learned to feel safe, where he'd stopped hoarding food and started leaving toys scattered around like he belonged. Standing there, I realized that the choice wasn't really mine to make. The letter belonged to Marcus, not to me. His mother's words, her explanations, her apologies, they were meant for him. I'd spent 12 years being the gatekeeper of his story, deciding what he was ready to hear and when. But he wasn't 7 anymore. He was a man, capable of handling complex truths, strong enough to process painful realities. That evening, when Marcus came home from his classes, I was waiting for him in the living room with the letter on the coffee table between us. "We need to talk," I said. He must have heard something in my voice because his expression changed immediately. The casual happiness of a college student coming home after a good day drained away, replaced by weariness. He sat down across from me, his backpack sliding to the floor. "What's wrong?" I picked up the envelope and held it out to him. "This came for you today. It's from your birth mother." His face went completely still. For a moment he didn't even breathe. Then he reached out and took the letter, turning it over in his hands like it might explode. "She's dying," I said quietly. "She's in hospice in Phoenix. She wanted to contact you before." I couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus was staring at the envelope, his thumb tracing the edges where the paper had been worn soft from my handling. "How long have you known?" he asked. Since this morning, I've been trying to decide whether to give it to you or throw it away. His voice was flat, emotionless. I thought about it, I admitted. I thought about protecting you from this. He looked up at me then, and something in his expression had shifted. There was hurt there, but also something else. Disappointment, maybe, or betrayal. That wasn't your choice to make, Dad. The words hit me like a physical blow. In all our years together, Marcus had never spoken to me with anything approaching anger. Even as a teenager, even during the normal rebellion and boundary testing that came with growing up, he'd remained respectful, loving, grateful for the stability I'd provided. You're right, I said. I'm sorry, I should have given it to you immediately. He was quiet for a long time, just holding the letter. Finally, he said, will you stay while I read it? I don't want to do this alone. I nodded, settling back in my chair while he carefully opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read, saw the emotions play across his features like weather patterns. Confusion, anger, sadness, hope, disappointment, all mixing together in an expression I couldn't quite read. When he finished, he folded the letter and set it down on the coffee table. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Linda Morrison's words hanging between us like smoke. She says she loved me, he said finally. Yes, she says she left because she loved me. That's what she says. Do you believe her? I considered the question carefully. This was the moment I'd been dreading for 12 years, the moment when I'd have to decide whether to maintain the protective narrative I'd created or trust him with the full complexity of human nature. I think she loved you as much as she was capable of loving anyone, I said. I think her addiction was stronger than her love, but that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. People can love someone and still hurt them. People can make terrible choices for good reasons and good choices for terrible reasons. It's not as simple as we'd like it to be. Marcus picked up the letter again, reading something specific. She says she's been clean for 3 years. 3 years, 2 months and 16 days, I quoted from memory. But she waited until she was dying to contact me. Yes, why? I don't know, Marcus. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she thought you were better off without her. Maybe she was protecting herself from the possibility that you wouldn't want to see her. He was quiet again, processing. Then, do you think I should go see her? The question I'd been hoping he wouldn't ask, the one I had no good answer for. Do you want to see her? I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me has been waiting my whole life for this moment, for her to come back and explain why she left. But another part of me is angry that she gets to just show up now, when she's dying, and ask for forgiveness or closure or whatever this is. Those are both valid feelings. What would you do, if you were me? I took a deep breath. If I were you, I think I would go, not for her sake, but for yours. I think you'd always wonder if you didn't, always question what she might have told you, what you might have learned about yourself and your history. But I also think you need to be prepared for the possibility that seeing her won't give you the answers you've been looking for. He nodded slowly. Will you come with me? The request surprised me. Of course, if that's what you want. I mean, you're my dad. You're the one who raised me, who was there for everything that mattered. If I'm going to face this, I want you there. Something loosened in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Whatever this letter changed between us, whatever questions it raised about the story we'd built together, we were still father and son. We were still a family. We booked flights for the following weekend. Marcus spent the week researching hospice care, reading about end-stage liver disease, preparing himself for what he might find. I spent it worrying about him, about whether I was making the right choice in supporting this reunion, about what damage it might do to the careful healing we'd accomplished over the years. The flight to Phoenix was quiet. Marcus stared out the window at the desert landscape below, lost in thoughts I couldn't access. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, wanted to offer comfort or wisdom, or at least distraction, but something told me he needed to process this alone, in his own way. The hospice facility was smaller than I'd expected, more like a large house than a medical institution. The walls were painted in soft colors, and there were gardens visible through every window. It felt peaceful, dignified, like a place where people could let go without fear. Linda Morrison was in room 12, according to the nurse who greeted us at the front desk. She's having a good day today, the woman said kindly, alert and comfortable, but she tires easily, so don't plan on staying too long. Marcus stopped outside the door, his hand frozen on the handle. I could see him steeling himself, gathering courage for something he'd never had to do before, meet the person who'd given him life and then walked away from it. Ready? I asked. No, but let's do it anyway. The woman in the bed was barely recognizable as the person I'd imagined from Marcus's scattered childhood memories. She was thin to the point of frailty, her skin yellow tinged from liver failure, her hair gray and sparse, but her eyes were the same storm cloud color as Marcus's, and when she saw him standing in the doorway, her face transformed with a joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Marcus," she whispered. He stepped into the room slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Hi, Mom." The word hung in the air between them, strange and familiar all at once. She started crying then, silent tears that traced paths down her hollow cheeks. "You're so tall," she said, "so handsome, you look just like your father." It was the first time anyone had ever told Marcus anything about his father, and I saw him freeze at the information. "I have pictures," she said, reaching for a small photo album on her bedside table. "Would you like to see?" He sat down in the chair next to her bed, and she opened the album with trembling hands. The first page showed a young woman who looked like a healthy version of the person in the bed, holding a tiny baby with serious dark eyes. "That's you at 6 weeks old," she said. "You were such a good baby. Hardly ever cried, always watching everything like you were trying to figure out the world." She turned the page. More pictures. Marcus as a toddler, chubby-cheeked and grinning. Marcus at maybe 3 or 4, sitting on the shoulders of a tall man with kind eyes and dark hair. "That's your father," she said softly. "David Chen. He was a good man, Marcus. He loved you so much." "Chen? Like the neighbor?" She nodded. "He was Mrs. Chen's nephew. That's how we met actually. He was visiting for the summer and we just clicked, but he was in the military, stationed overseas. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't tell him. I thought I could handle it on my own, and by the time I realized I couldn't, he'd been deployed to Afghanistan." "What happened to him?" Her face crumpled. "IED, improvised explosive device. He never even knew about you, Marcus. I'd written him letters, but they were returned unopened. He'd been gone for 3 months before I found out." I watched Marcus absorb this information, saw him trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle of his identity. His father hadn't abandoned him by choice. His father had died before he ever knew he existed. "Does Mrs. Chen know?" he asked. Linda shook her head. "I was too ashamed to tell her after everything fell apart. I thought she'd blame me for not telling David about you, for letting him die without knowing he had a son. But I think about her sometimes. Wonder if she sees you around the neighborhood and notices the resemblance." We spent another hour looking through pictures, Linda sharing memories of Marcus's early years, that he'd been too young to remember clearly. She told him about his first word, which was more, and how he'd insisted on wearing his Superman shirt every day for 6 months straight. She told him about the way he'd hum himself to sleep, and how he'd try to share his food with Peanut the elephant. But she also told him harder truths, about the pills that had started as pain medication after a car accident, and gradually taken over her life, about the choices she'd made, the people she'd hurt, the lies she'd told herself about being able to stop whenever she wanted. "I thought I was functional," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was hiding it from you, that you didn't know how bad things had gotten. But you knew, didn't you? You were trying to take care of me." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I was scared all the time," he said. "Scared you wouldn't wake up, scared the bad men would come back, scared we'd run out of food again. I used to hide crackers under my pillow just in case." "I'm sorry," she said, reaching for his hand. "I'm so sorry, baby. You should never have had to live like that." When visiting hours ended, Linda was exhausted but seemed somehow lighter, like sharing these memories had lifted a weight she'd been carrying for years. Marcus promised to come back the next day, and she squeezed his hand with what little strength he had left. "Thank you for raising him," she said to me, as we prepared to leave. "Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't." Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in the rental car with his head in his hands. I didn't know what to say, how to comfort him, how to help him process everything he'd learned. "She really did love me," he said finally. "Yes, she did, but she left anyway. Sometimes love isn't enough, Marcus. Sometimes people are too broken to act on their love in healthy ways. That doesn't make the love less real, but it doesn't make the abandonment less harmful either." He looked at me then, And I saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or forgiveness. You saved me, Dad. When she couldn't save herself, when she couldn't save me, you did. You gave me everything I needed to become the person I am today. We saved each other, I said. You saved me too, in ways you'll probably never understand. We visited Linda 3 more times over the weekend. Each visit was shorter than the last as her strength faded, but Marcus seemed to find something he needed in those conversations. Not closure exactly, but understanding, context, the missing pieces of his story that helped explain not just why she'd left, but why he'd survived. On our last visit, Linda gave him something she'd been saving, a small wooden box that had belonged to his father. Inside were letters David had written, but never sent, pictures from his deployment, and a silver watch that had been his grandfather's. He was going to give this to you someday, she said, when you were old enough to understand what it meant to carry on a family legacy. I want you to have it now. Marcus held the watch in his palm, turning it over to read the inscription on the back. Time spent with family is worth every second. Love, Grandpa Chen. That night, our last night in Phoenix, Marcus asked if we could drive past his old neighborhood. The apartment building where he'd lived with Linda was scheduled for demolition, but it was still standing, boarded up and covered in graffiti. He sat in the car staring at the third-floor window that had been his bedroom, trying to reconcile his memories of that scared little boy with the man he'd become. I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't taken me in, he said. Where I would have ended up, who I would have become. You would have found a way to survive, I said. You're stronger than you know, but would I have learned to trust people? Would I have believed I was worth loving? Would I have had the courage to help other kids the way I want to? I don't know, Marcus, but I know that the person you are today, the strength you have, the capacity for love and forgiveness you've shown this weekend, that comes from inside you. I may have provided stability, but the core of who you are, that was always yours. Linda Morrison died 2 weeks after we returned home. Marcus got the call on a Thursday morning while he was getting ready for class. He cried for an hour, mourning not just the woman she'd been at the end, but the mother she might have been under different circumstances. The funeral was small, just a handful of people from her recovery group and the staff from the hospice. Marcus spoke about forgiveness and second chances, about the complexity of human nature, and the way love could persist even in the darkest circumstances. After the service, we drove to Mrs. Chen's house. Marcus had decided to tell her about his father, to give her the gift of knowing that her nephew's life had continued in ways he'd never known. She cried when he showed her the pictures, when she saw David's eyes reflected in his face. She pulled out her own photo albums, showing him pictures of his father as a child, stories about his kindness, and his dreams of starting a family. You have his hands, she said, holding Marcus's fingers up to a picture of David at 18, and his smile. He would have been so proud of you. She invited us for dinner that weekend, and again the weekend after that. Slowly, carefully, she became part of our family in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. Marcus had found not just answers about his past, but connections that would shape his future. But the most important conversation came a month later, on a quiet Sunday evening when we were both reading in the living room. Marcus looked up from his textbook and said the words that changed everything between us. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I put down my book, sensing the weight of whatever was coming. What is it? When I was little, when I kept asking why my parents threw me away, you always told me stories about the universe moving people to where they belonged. About how maybe everything happened the way it did, so I could end up with you. Did you believe that, or were you just trying to make me feel better? I looked at this young man who'd grown up to be everything I'd hoped, and more, who'd faced the truth about his past with courage and grace, who'd learned to hold both love and abandonment in the same space without letting either destroy him. Both, I said honestly. I was trying to make you feel better because you were in pain, and you deserved better than the hand you'd been dealt. But I also came to believe it was true, not because there's some cosmic plan that required you to suffer, but because the person you became, the strength you developed, the compassion you learned, those things came from surviving what you survived, and choosing to love anyway. He smiled then, that same transformative smile that had been lighting up our house for 12 years. That's what I thought. And Dad, I still believe it too. Even now, knowing everything I know about why she left and why he never knew about me, I still think I ended up exactly where I belonged. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself thinking about the letter that had started it all, the decision I'd almost made to throw it away, to protect Marcus from the truth about his mother's love and abandonment and death. I'd been so afraid that the truth would destroy the story we'd built together, that it would undermine his sense of worth and belonging, but instead, the truth had made our story stronger. It had given him context without changing his core understanding of himself. It had added complexity to his past without diminishing his future. Most importantly, it had proven that the foundation we'd built together was strong enough to weather any storm, honest enough to survive any revelation. Marcus was right about the universe moving people to where they belonged. But it wasn't some grand cosmic plan that had brought us together. It was a series of choices made by flawed, complicated people who were doing their best with impossible circumstances. His mother's choice to leave him, the system's choice to place him with me, my choice to love him unconditionally, his choice to trust that love and build a life on it, and now, his choice to forgive his mother and embrace the full complexity of his story, while still holding on to the truth that had sustained him. He was wanted, he was loved, and he belonged exactly where he was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. 6 months after Linda's funeral, Marcus graduated from community college with honors and a clear vision for his future. He'd been accepted to the State University's social work program, specializing in child welfare and trauma recovery. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that the boy who'd been abandoned by the system had chosen to dedicate his life to fixing it. But something had shifted between us since Phoenix, not damaged exactly, but deepened in ways I was still trying to understand. Marcus had always been mature for his age, forced into early wisdom by circumstances beyond his control. But now there was something different in his eyes when he looked at me, a knowing that hadn't been there before. It started with small things, questions about my own childhood that he'd never asked before, comments about family dynamics that showed he was thinking more critically about relationships, about the stories people tell themselves and each other. He'd always accepted my explanations about his past with the trust of someone who had no reason to doubt the person who'd saved him. Now he was analyzing those explanations with the mind of someone studying human behavior professionally. The conversation I'd been dreading came on a warm evening in July. We were sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies blink across the yard like tiny stars. Marcus was reading case files for his summer internship at the County Family Services office, preparing for his first real exposure to the system that had shaped his life. "Dad," he said without looking up from his papers, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. When you first took me in, did you know anything about my parents beyond what was in my file?" The question felt like stepping on ice that might crack. I'd been waiting for this moment since we'd returned from Phoenix, knowing that his newfound understanding of his mother's complexity would eventually lead him to question what I'd known and when. "What makes you ask?" He set down his papers and looked at me directly. "I've been reading about the foster care intake process, about how much information caseworkers typically share with potential placements. And I've been thinking about some of the things you used to tell me when I was little, about how my parents were sick, not bad. About how addiction was a disease that made it hard for people to make good choices. Those weren't things most people would know to say to a 7-year-old unless they had some experience with it." I felt my chest tighten. Marcus had grown into someone who could read between the lines, who understood that the stories we tell children are often simplified versions of more complex truths. He was asking me to account for the gap between what I'd claimed to know and what I'd actually known. "Margaret told me some things," I said carefully, "not everything, but enough to understand that your mother's situation was complicated." "What kind of things?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would define whether we moved forward with complete honesty or maintained the careful boundaries I'd constructed years ago. "About her addiction, about the pattern of neglect that led to your removal, about the fact that she'd tried rehab before but hadn't been successful."
Ooh.
"Did you know she was still alive when I was asking about her?" This was the question I'd been most afraid of. The one that cut to the heart of every choice I'd made about how much truth to share and when. "No, Marcus, I genuinely didn't know where she was or if she was alive. The system loses track of birth parents all the time, especially when they don't engage with reunification services." I always told you the truth about not knowing what had happened to her. But you suspected she was probably alive. The distinction was important, and he was right to press on it.
Oh.
Yes, I suspected she was probably alive. Statistically, most birth parents in situations like yours are alive, but unable or unwilling to maintain contact. I didn't tell you that because I didn't want you spending your childhood waiting for someone who might never come back. He nodded slowly, processing this.
Ah.
Did you ever try to find her? The question surprised me. Once I said, when you turned 18, I hired a private investigator to see if we could locate her, thinking that maybe as an adult you'd want the option of contact. But the investigator couldn't find anything. No current address, no employment records, no recent arrests. It was like she disappeared completely. Why didn't you tell me about that? Because I didn't want to get your hopes up if it led nowhere, and because I wasn't sure you were ready to handle whatever we might find. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening yard. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. I understand why you made the choices you made, Dad, and I'm grateful that you protected me when I needed protecting. But I'm not 7 anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I know that, but it's hard to adjust, you know.
Ah.
For 12 years my job was to shield you from things that might hurt you. It's difficult to switch from protecting you to trusting you, to handle difficult information. I get that. But if we're going to be a family as adults, if I'm going to trust you the way I did when I was a kid, I need to know that you'll tell me the truth, even when it's complicated. Even when you think it might hurt me. The words stung, but they were fair. Marcus was asking for something that every adult child eventually asks for, to be treated as an equal rather than someone who needs protection from the world's harsh realities. You're right, I said. I'm still learning how to be the father of a grown man instead of the father of a scared little boy, but I want to do better. What do you need from me? Honesty, complete honesty. If you know something about my past, about my parents, about the decisions that were made on my behalf, I want to know. I can handle it, Dad. I've proven that. He had proven it. His response to his mother's letter, his grace during their meetings, his ability to hold both love and disappointment in the same space without being destroyed by either, had shown a maturity and resilience that I'd helped build but that ultimately belonged to him. Okay, I said, complete honesty from now on. But I want the same from you. If you have questions about anything, if you're struggling with something, if you need help processing difficult information, I want you to come to me. We're in this together, Marcus. We always have been. Deal, he said, and for the first time in months his smile looked completely natural. The conversation opened a door between us that had been cracked but not fully opened since his mother's death. Over the following weeks Marcus asked more questions about his early placement, about the challenges I'd faced as a new foster parent, about the decisions I'd made regarding his care and education and emotional development. Some of the questions were harder than others. He wanted to know about the nights I'd sat outside his door listening for nightmares, about the conversations with his teachers about his academic delays, about the child psychologist I'd consulted during his first year with me. He wanted to understand not just what had happened to him, but what it had been like for me to navigate his healing. Did you ever regret taking me in? He asked one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. Never, I said without hesitation. Not once. Even on the hardest days, even when I wasn't sure I was making the right choices, I never regretted having you in my life. What were the hardest days like? I thought about those early months, about the tantrums that seemed to come from nowhere, about finding food hidden in his room, months after he'd stopped hoarding, about the way he'd flinch if I moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. You used to have these panic attacks, I said, usually triggered by something that reminded you of the chaos you'd lived with before. Sirens, raised voices, sometimes just the sound of the front door closing too hard. You'd curl up in the corner of your closet and refuse to come out for hours. I'd sit on the floor outside the closet and talk to you through the door, telling you stories or reading books, waiting for you to calm down enough to let me help you. How long did that last? About 8 months. Gradually the episodes got less frequent and less severe. You learned to trust that the loud noises didn't mean danger, that raised voices didn't mean violence was coming, that I wasn't going to disappear if I left the house. That must have been exhausting for you. It was, but not in a way that made me want to give up. It was the kind of exhausting that comes from caring deeply about someone's healing, like staying up all night with a sick child. You do it because love makes it necessary, not because it's easy. These conversations helped us both understand how we'd arrived at this point in our relationship. Marcus gained insight into the patience and commitment that had shaped his recovery, while I gained appreciation for the courage and resilience he'd shown in learning to trust again. But the most important conversation came near the end of summer, just before Marcus was set to transfer to the university. We were going through old photo albums, sorting pictures for him to take to his dorm room, when he came across a photo I'd forgotten I'd kept. It was from his second week with me, taken during one of his panic attacks. He was huddled in the corner of his closet, face streaked with tears, clutching Peanut like a lifeline. I was sitting on the floor beside the closet, my back against the wall, reading aloud from one of his picture books. "Why did you take this picture?" he asked, studying the image. "I needed to document everything for your file, but also because I wanted to remember how far you'd come. That was one of your worst days, but look at my face in the picture. I'm not frustrated or overwhelmed. I'm just present with you in your pain, waiting for it to pass." He stared at the photo for a long time, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. "This is what love looks like, isn't it? Not the easy moments but the hard ones, not protecting someone from pain, but staying with them while they feel it." "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what love looks like." He set the photo aside, separate from the others he was planning to take. "Can I keep this one?" "Of course, but why that one?" "Because it reminds me that I was never alone, even in my worst moments, and because it shows me what kind of parent I want to be someday. Present with people in their pain, not trying to fix everything, just staying close enough that they know they're not abandoned." The night before he left for university, Marcus came to my room after I'd gone to bed. He knocked softly on the door, then sat on the edge of my bed like he used to do when he was small and couldn't sleep. "Dad, I have one more question, and this might be the most important one." "What is it?" "If someone had told you 12 years ago, everything that taking me in would involve, all the sleepless nights and panic attacks and complicated questions about family and belonging, would you have still said yes?" I didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, every single time, even knowing that I'd eventually grow up and leave. Especially knowing that the whole point was to raise you to be independent, to be strong enough to build your own life. If you stayed with me forever, it would mean I'd failed. He smiled then, and there was something both sad and proud in his expression. "I used to be afraid that growing up meant losing you, that becoming independent would break whatever bond we'd built, but it's the opposite, isn't it? The stronger I become, the more I appreciate what you gave me. The more I understand about the world, the more I realize how lucky I was that you found me." "We found each other," I corrected, "and you're not losing me by growing up, Marcus. You're just adding to yourself. I'll always be your dad, no matter how old you get or how far you go." The next morning, we loaded his car with everything he'd need for his new life: clothes, books, pictures, the wooden box his father had left behind, and Peanut the elephant, now threadbare, but still treasured. As he was getting ready to drive away, he pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I wrote you something," he said, handing it to me. "Don't read it until after I leave, okay?" Inside the envelope was a letter written in his careful handwriting. "Dad, 12 years ago, you promised a scared little boy that he was safe, that he was wanted, that he belonged somewhere. You kept that promise every single day, even when I made it difficult, even when you weren't sure you were doing it right. You asked me once if I thought the universe moved people to where they belonged. I told you I believed it, and I still do. But I understand now that the universe doesn't work through cosmic plans or predetermined destinies. It works through people like you, who choose love over convenience, commitment over comfort, hope over fear. You didn't just give me a home, Dad. You taught me that I was worth having a home. You didn't just tell me I was lovable. You loved me in ways that made me believe it. You didn't just promise to stay. You showed me what staying looks like, even when it's hard. I know I'll face challenges in my new life, moments when I'll question myself or struggle with difficult truths. But I also know that I have something many people don't, an unshakable foundation built by someone who chose to love me unconditionally. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for raising me. Thank you for trusting me with the truth about my past and helping me understand that my story doesn't end with abandonment. It begins with being found. I love you, Dad, always." Marcus. I stood in the driveway long after his car had disappeared around the corner, reading the letter again and again. 20 years from now, when Marcus has children of his own, when he's helping other kids navigate trauma and abandonment, when he's building his own family traditions and creating his own legacy, he'll understand what I understood in that moment, that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't protection from pain, but the tools to survive it with grace. That evening, I called Mrs. Chen and asked if she'd like to have dinner. We sat in her kitchen, looking through more pictures of David, talking about Marcus and the man he'd become. She showed me letters David had written to his family from Afghanistan, full of hopes and dreams for the future he'd never get to see. He wanted to be a teacher, she said. He wrote about how much he loved working with kids, how he thought he could make a difference in young people's lives. He did make a difference, I said. Through Marcus, his son is going to help hundreds of kids over the course of his career. David's legacy is alive in every child Marcus saves. That night, I sat in Marcus's empty room, looking at the walls that had witnessed his transformation from a terrified 7-year-old to a confident young man. The space felt both empty and full, quiet but not lonely. It was the natural conclusion of a story that had begun with abandonment and evolved into belonging. Marcus was right about the universe moving people to where they needed to be, not through magic or destiny, but through the countless small choices people make to care for each other, to stay when leaving would be easier, to love when indifference would be safer. His mother had made choices that led to his abandonment, but she'd also made the choice to write that final letter, to give him the gift of understanding her love even in its broken form. His father had made the choice to serve his country, unaware that he was leaving behind a son who would carry his best qualities forward. I'd made the choice to open my home and heart to a child who needed both. And Marcus had made the choice to trust, to heal, to forgive, and to build his life on the foundation we'd created together while reaching toward a future entirely his own. The story that began with a 7-year-old asking why his parents had thrown him away had become something much larger, a testament to the power of chosen family, persistent love, and the courage to tell the truth even when it's complicated. Marcus never stopped asking hard questions, but he learned to find peace with complex answers. His mother had loved him, and abandoned him. His father had wanted him without knowing he existed. I had protected him and eventually learned to trust him with difficult truths. All of these things could be true simultaneously, creating a story rich enough to build a life on. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.